Hey, it's Miss Telke here. I'm going to do a weaving demonstration for you guys today. In particular, it's going to be called a wavy weaving. This is just a simple example that I made a while ago and that I laminated just for student purposes so people could touch and examine. So you're probably familiar with weaving, although it's not always done with paper, but a lot of weaving is simply just strips of paper that are kind of threaded over and under. And this is just an example of, blue and purple paper that a student of mine did. It can be done with any, colors of paper. You don't have to necessarily measure and have the strips of paper be the same size or the same color. You can have a lot of fun like that. In fact, if you sort of exaggerate it and have some of the strips be much thinner than others or more thick than others, that can be really interesting as well. And another effect I like is to actually leave little spaces between some of the woven strips. The empty spaces can be just as interesting as the filled in spaces. But for the weaving technique, so for this example, you just need two different colors of paper. It does help to have colors that have high contrast, that are pretty different from each other. So for this first example, I simply did it with 4 strips on each side. I'm going to do one that's just a little bit more complex today, but so these are just some pieces of paper that I'm going to show how to cut with. So again, 2 colors that are, pretty dramatically different from each other. And on one piece of paper, you're going to cut strips vertically, and on another one, you're going to cut horizontally. So some people might draw lines in advance because they feel better doing that. I like to be kind of loosey-goosey, fancy-free. And I just sort of cut sort of wavy lines. They can be very exaggerated, or they can be kind of, looser, gentler lines. One thing I would suggest is don't do what I'm doing right now. Don't pull those scissors back and stop. It makes it harder to make a more natural cut. It's better just to keep going. Now, if you did what I did and you just kind of backed out one time because you needed to take a break, that's okay. But in general, I would just try to just have a very, kind of smooth, fluid cut, okay? And then after you cut that piece, it is important that you kind of arrange it somewhere so that when you cut this next piece, you can kind of puzzle piece that up and, and put it right next to it. So I'm gonna put that to the side for right now because I do have some pre-cut pieces for us. But again, remember when you go to cut you're gonna arrange all those pieces that you cut. It really doesn't matter. You can do a lot of little tiny strips, or you can do very wide ones like my first example, but make sure when you go with your second piece of paper that you cut in the opposite direction. So this time I'm cutting horizontal lines that are going in the opposite direction. Okay, so you just want one set that's vertical and one that's horizontal. Okay, so doing that same thing, and then same thing, I would lay this out neatly somewhere. Another trick that I do is that I like to write numbers or letters. So I've got this set arranged out, and I've actually written 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then I have another set over here that's lighter green paper, and I wrote the alphabet, and I did A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. Okay, so, but that's a good thing because you never know. Somebody could come in the house, door opens, wind blows everywhere, everything that you've got laid out kind of blew around, whatever, or in my case, you might have a cat jump on your table. So, these are just, little precautions you can take so that you don't have to do a lot of figuring out later. All right. Another thing that I like to do once I have it arranged is just, I give it a little space in between, but you could really lock it in super close together if you wanted to. And then I use a little bit of tape. Now, technically, you could do it with Scotch tape and, probably a number of other tapes, but masking tape is kind of nice because it's less likely to tear your paper, okay? But you don't have, a whole bunch of times to get this right, so, and I just do a little bit of the edge, all right? So it looks like maybe 1/4 of an inch at most is covered up by that tape, because even masking tape does stick to paper and it can kind of do damage and things like that. So you want like a tape that really is not super sticky and that will release well eventually. Okay, so now I've got these all laid out. I've got my green strips, okay, and I'm just gonna weave like I would anything else. I'm gonna put it under the first strip, over the second, so I'm just having to lift up every other one. So in this case, in my case, it's the odd numbers that I'm lifting up. Okay, And the first piece is always kind of the hardest to me, but oops. Okay, and then I just sort of shove that all the way up to the top. Now, you know, it's not gonna get quite to the end, but I'm gonna get it as close as I can. And then I'm having it, in this case, I'll probably have it line up with the right side, because there's probably gonna be just a little space on the edge where it doesn't quite make it all the way. Or the other thing you could choose to do is kind of split the difference and get it in the middle right there. So I might choose to do that as well. So, all right, now the next thing is, I do wanna kind of check and make sure, okay, is that lining up well? I think it is. Okay, there we go. Got it lined up well, make sure I had the right piece. All right, and this time I'm going over my odd numbers and under my evens. Okay, so on and so forth. All right, and this is a little bit trickier. You're gonna have to kind of figure out how it puzzle pieces together. And then it's gonna start making kind of an interesting scalloped design. All right, and oops. Gotta really work to get that in there. All right, and over, under, over, under. If you're doing this for the first time, you might want to keep it simple and do really big strips, especially if you're doing it with someone young. It'll be a little easier for their fingers and a little bit less confusion. But you can see it's just kind of a fun, you know, creative texture. And then, you know, you can kind of glue it together. I like to start by gluing the corners first. And then I go around the edges and get all those edges. And then when I'm gluing it, I also definitely make sure to flip it over and glue the back side. And that can be somewhat time consuming. I don't even really spend a lot of time thinking about the under over. I just kind of make sure it looks like a checkerboard. Okay, and I have this one little piece on the side. It's kind of starting to push its way out. That's natural. You're kind of, you know, pushing the paper around and putting different tensions on it and things like that. And it's not unusual to kind of, maybe your last piece doesn't fit on so much or things like that, or it starts to widen, just slight imperfections from doing crafts by hand. And then another fun thing that you can do is after you've assembled this entire kind of woven mat, another thing that you can do is rather than maybe gluing the corners and things like that, you could actually put glue on one whole side and then glue it to another piece of paper, and that's going to hold it together really, really well. And the advantage to doing something like that is that you could then cut a shape out of it. So, you know, maybe you're trying to make a heart for a Valentine's Day card, or, you know, some kind of interesting shape to be a decorative detail on something else. And whew, I think this is, it looks like I'm not going to be able to get my very last piece in there. So I'll probably stop with this one. Again, and it could be that if I kind of shove things in tighter, I could get my last piece in there, but it could also just not fit because of my taping and things like that. So again, you can use a glue stick for gluing. I like a little bit stronger glue, so I tend to use, like, you know, liquid glues like Elmer's and school glues and things like that. Very small amounts of glue will go a long way. I had a little too much right there, so I might use some extra. Again, I would secure those corners early on, because that's going to keep your whole thing from coming apart. And it looks like my kitty is interested in what we're doing up here and is maybe going to make a cameo in our video. And this is all the more reason to definitely get those corners glued first. Mal loves doing crafts with me, or at least seeing what I'm up to. Okay, so anyway, this is a completed woven mat. You want to secure it on your edges, on your sides. You want to flip it over and do it on the other side, and it'll have an interesting pattern on the other side as well. And just have fun. Happy creating.